In the previous video, I was talking about tribal characteristics impact to the religion, or the religion may have been caused by certain circumstance specific to that tribe at the time. And I was talking about some Buddhist example, and even talking about the communist view of their world, which is not religion, but has some tendency bringing into some brief belief system, as well as I also talked about Christianity and Buddhism. The original idea is, of course, I mentioned that Daisetz's book. He mentioned this in 1948, but I'm still believing that this tendency is still so valid for us to think about the future, how we may go over the narrowly defined religion specific to tribalism, but rather to look at more holistic picture. Kind of like within each individual, there are lots of mini brains thinking this one, thinking, but we need to have a synchronized idea, how to have all those things somehow processed, not like a silo, but going beyond synchronicity or awakening. That's the direction, and for that, I think it may be meaningful to go through this. So let me continue from the previous one. The point was about the people who started the religion, for whatever the reason, had certain hierarchical state. He may have been wealthy or poor or somewhere in between, and that may have had some influence for this person to initiate some idea which makes sense for him or her, but also to others who are surrounding in that environment. So that may have contributed. So if you look at the Christianity, and Daisetz is talking about the Jewish people and their view of how they thought about their life being suppressed from various other tribes to be kicked out of Egypt, for example, and then go into Middle East, but still was not as settled. So they are spreading out around, but they still have certain connection among them, and they have some strength in that they keep this shared understanding, the view of the world, and how to make the most of it. And what's interesting, however, is that only in China, because of its, the effect that they have, even the Jewish people may have been kind of sucked into the system, as if like a philosophy or the religion from India came to China, and their way of living, pragmatic way, but also the influence from the Taoism and so forth, made the Buddhism into their version, so to speak, even coming up with the idea of Zen in a specific approach that they developed, or later in Japan spreading out the Pure Land sect into Shin Buddhism, expanding sort of, in this case, not in China, but accommodating to the needs of Japanese people, and came up with certain, what I see as more progressed version of the Pure Land religion. So, depending upon the characters of the people in each tribe, so to speak, but given the current situation of how the information is shared, and people may be more exposed to various tribes, so to speak, through the internet or actual visiting of the countries of different origin, like in my case, moving from Japan to the US and in New Zealand and other places I lived and traveled so much, that gave me a sense of how do we see us integrating or going beyond the sect or the silo idea of separation, but rather what's the common ground. So that's basically its whole point of this article that Daisetz mentioned. So back to the Jewish people, and because of their intellectual ability being advanced, and as well as in the spiritual end of it, they have such a pride, and there's something that we may appreciate if we understand. So again, the background, in this case of Jewish people, is related to, if you want to use the word suppression, being kicked out or underprivileged, and that caused them possibly to be reacting or responding to such situation felt as need to go over. So that gave them more stimuli to go beyond the challenge. And if it's a weak tribe of ethnicity, it may not have been possible. If I think about the Japanese, they are so isolated and harmonious. It's the opposite of the Jewish peoples. So it has its own merit, I would think, to develop certain character from that. But the Jewish people has its own character, which is very much interesting and important for us to understand how this segmented view of the world into more, hopefully, integrated, advanced. So moving forward, it may take years and years and centuries, but still, because of the fluidity of people moving around, hopefully, and the information spreading out, not being hampered by the dictators and strong opinion, egotistical view, but rather more encompassing the whole picture. So that's the story that I feel that Daisetz was pointing. So in relation to the Christianity, his point is that because of the Christ being the son of carpenter and lower level of the society, and it may have a huge impact or more impact to those who work at the labor level, that should be the way that influenced. And if you listen to words like, if you ask, it will be given. If you seek for it, you'll find. And also saying that for those who are poor in mind is lucky. Maybe that's not the right English, but it's good that they are the ones who can have the sadness perhaps to go beyond. So there are certain elements that the group of people, tribe, in this case Jewish people, connect and the impact to the religion, the ethics they have, has such an impact. At the same time, there's an issue about the peace, but for the peace, there may be a need for strength. So how do we understand that? So it has to be related to the historical background at the time, but there is just to point that there will be a, if you use the word rebellious, responding to the need of what they get into in their destiny to go through it, has to have some key element that we can understand how the religion may be taken by those people and expanding and solidifying the view so that it can have its value for the future generation. Also pointing that those who are rich, it's difficult to get into the kingdom of heaven, and it is like a camel. It's even more difficult than the camel going through the eye of the needle. So going beyond the wealth or the poorness is the thought in there, which is connected to the view there's a level of society they detected, those who has the power, those who do not, and that's something that contribute them to be more resisting to prove what the right and ideas of those people can be appreciated. I'll go forward. And this characteristics of rebellious nature, if that's the word, to go against the hierarchical pressures and so forth, may have been coming from the Christ himself, but overall, the Jewish people, they have that tendency, maybe subconscious in their mind. So that's Daisetz's view. Again, to understand the tribalism, their background, and how they may have impacted, so that we may be able to relate to whatever the situation we have in the world, so that how certain type of people respond in certain way because of who they are, but also related to the historical background of where they came from with the belief of their religion. So if you think about this time Christianity, not going to Europe, but if it did come to the Asia, what would have been the case? Here, Daisetz mentioned that wouldn't it be more suited for the European people to have Christianity? So it's difficult to, analyze this, but there may be a few points that he may be able to think about. So European tribe, as you call that, the big tribe, and their view or the approach in life is dualistic if you compare with the Asian tribe. There's a God and man, man and nature. There's a division, and that's relating to the Jewish philosophy, as much as Descartes talked about the material and the mind, and then started to progress this dualistic logic. But if you go back, the Greek people, it appears that what they have done, as in the case of Aristotle and others, there may be the seed of that dualistic notion, using the logic to be important to analyze things and organize the society or the organization to manage. So that's Daisetz's view, that the European people have certain basis to use the brain and the logic, as opposed to the case for the Asian tribes. That's what he says. The Asian tribes, compared to the European, seem to be less talented, if that's the word, in analyzing or conjecturing, thinking forward, or organizational abilities. So that may have had connected to their basis, the religion, i.e. Buddhism or Hinduism. He didn't mention about Hinduism, it's more focused on the Buddhism as an example that may be seen in, for example, in the sutras. That's my view. He didn't say about the sutra, but the Buddhist approach didn't have much emphasis on this dualistic notion, but rather more of a holistic area. So that's the difference. And if you think about Buddhism that was brought out in India, and if it did go instead of the East but to the West, to the European, then what could be the impact? I think from here, this is my conjecture, but that movement to China went around almost 2,000 years ago, or even before that. There seemed to have a connection, maybe because of the geological issues, the closeness compared to the European, and therefore the Greek and the basis from this Judaism and the logic dualistic notion seem to have had much weight on the west part of the world than the east. So now, or in the last 200 years perhaps, if I just pick the number, there's an issue like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and even like Jung and many others, even the physicists and the scientists, picking up the notion, intuitive notion that is valued in the East may be absorbed in the Western culture, may have had some influence. To what degree is unknown, but that's just the symptom that I see it interesting. So, to summarize up to here, I think Daisetz's point that the Christianity may have more, if this is the word he should use, but combative, with the logic and maybe not just the logic, but deal with the difficulty. And there's that analytical and logical basis to confirm and build upon. And that kind of a notion was not easy to be received in the East. For example, in Buddhism, there are some metaphysical issues which I think Daisetz doesn't talk about, but there are some of that, but it's not staying strong. In other words, not compared to the Europeans, they still have less interest, especially for China and Japan, East Asia, compared to the Western part of the Europe and then the United States. So just to compare how Buddha died at the age 80 or so, that was death in nature, almost with age. The Christ's case is teaching, and then within 3 years or whatever the short term, he was on the cross to be punished, if that's the word. So it is the character of possibly Christ himself against the nature of that tribe in that area to go through difficulty. And still Christianity was expanding beyond that, perhaps related to the, I want to use the word contractual, which is like a logical way you deal with or connect or respect God to human, the duality. And what's the relationship, what's the punishment, what's the way, logically explaining. And if you look into the Jewish teaching, I studied some, I realized that it's almost like reading the Constitution of the United States and the discussion going back and forth between the rabbi, as if all the teachings were recorded and to be passed on to the next generation, so that there's a record of those logical understanding to be precise and follow up the spirit originated from 2,000 or more years ago. So in Buddha's case, there was no suppression for the Buddha to be, let's see what's going on here. I have to check. Okay. So for the case of Buddha, there was no suppression. And after he was out around age 30 and shared the idea, his teaching, and peacefully died under the tree, compared to the Christ, which may have said, "My God, why are you let me be in this condition," or some such word. My translation may not be good, but I think you understand. So that's the tragedy ending. But then, after 3 days, coming back, according to the story, resurrection, and that's on one side of the Christianity. But on the other side, the Buddha's idea, or Buddhism, is Buddha's still teaching at the Eagle Peak. I think this is Rajgir. I've been there. There's a mountain, and that's where he was teaching. And across the valley, there are people listening. I could imagine what may have happened. So that's the peaceful preaching of the idea for, if we call, happiness. So those are certain characteristics that we may find it interesting, possibly. It has its own merit, if you use the word. But as the society progresses and people get more knowledge, understanding, and experience, the melting pot may happen or may not happen. But again, for those who has interest about the future and whereabout of your belief system, it may be good to review those background. So let me finish it here, and I may continue in the next segment after this. Thank you.